Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, July 14th. I'm Laura Cornfield, and this is IBA News, broadcasting from Jerusalem. We open with the historic nuclear deal reached with Iran as the six world powers adopted a final comprehensive agreement with Tehran that will govern its nuclear program for the next decade. Here with more is IBA's Ali Wagalanter.
Today's deal culminates a two-year diplomatic effort in which the world powers, led by the United States, sought to end a 12-year crisis over Iran's nuclear work. Formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the 100-page document amounts to what experts are calling the most significant multilateral agreement reached in several decades. The deal allows Iran to retain much of its nuclear infrastructure and grants it the right to enrich uranium on its own soil. But the deal also requires Iran to cap and partially roll back that infrastructure for 10 to 15 years and grants the UN's nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, managed access to monitor that program with intrusive inspections. Iran has agreed explicitly in the deal to, quote, generally allow IAEA access, wording sought by the U.S. after Iran's history of generally rejecting such access. Tehran has also agreed to sign on to the IAEA's additional protocol, which broadens access in a binding manner and in perpetuity. In exchange, the governments of Britain, France, Russia, China, the U.S., and Germany have agreed to lift all UN sanctions on the Islamic Republic once Iran abides by a set of nuclear-related commitments. The moment Tehran receives sanctions relief, including access to an estimated $100 billion in frozen assets overseas, will be on implementation day, as one senior administration official put it this morning in Vienna. That date is not set and is entirely reliant on the pace of Iran's initial haste in preparing for life under the deal. Above and beyond its commitments made in a political agreement reached back in April, Iran has also agreed not to work on any technologies required for the construction of a nuclear warhead. That provision, U.S. officials said, does not have an expiration date. According to Western powers, the deal ensures that Iran cannot produce the materials necessary to build a nuclear weapon without the world having 1 year's notice. That, among non-proliferation experts, is colloquially referred to as breakout time. But that standard sunsets in 10 years. After that decade, officials could not say how Iran's program would develop. Iran's foreign minister and the European Union's foreign policy chief said the nuclear pact heralded a new chapter of hope and was a historic movement.
Let me begin by expressing my appreciation to everybody, to those who started this process and those who've continued this process in order to reach a win-win solution on what in our view was an unnecessary crisis and open new horizons for dealing with serious problems that affect our international community. I believe this is a historic moment. We are reaching an agreement that is not perfect for anybody, but it is what we could accomplish, and it is an important achievement for all of us. Today could have been the end of hope on this issue, but now we are starting a new chapter of hope.
And I think we all know that the decision we are going to take today is not only on Iran's nuclear program, but it is much, much more than this. It is a decision that can open the way to a new chapter in international relations and show that diplomacy, coordination, cooperation can overcome decades of tensions and confrontations. I think this is a sign of hope for the entire world, and we all know that this is very much needed in these times. Thank you for all the commitment and the work that each of us around this table has personally put in these negotiations.
U.S. President Barack Obama hailed the nuclear deal with Iran as an opportunity worth seizing, insisting that every pathway for Tehran to obtain a nuclear weapon has been cut off. Speaking from the White House, Obama gave his interpretation of the key points of the agreement.
Because of this deal, the international community will be able to verify that the Islamic Republic of Iran will not develop a nuclear weapon. This deal meets every single one of the bottom lines that we established when we achieved a framework earlier this spring. Every pathway to a nuclear weapon is cut off, and the inspection and transparency regime necessary to verify that objective will be put in place. Because of this deal, Iran will not produce the highly enriched uranium and weapons-grade plutonium that form the raw materials necessary for a nuclear bomb. Because of this deal, Iran will remove 2/3 of its installed centrifuges, the machines necessary to produce highly enriched uranium for a bomb, and store them under constant international supervision. Iran will not use its advanced centrifuges to produce enriched uranium for the next decade. Iran will also get rid of 98% of its stockpile of enriched uranium. To put that in perspective, Iran currently has a stockpile that could produce up to 10 nuclear weapons. Because of this deal, that stockpile will be reduced to a fraction of what would be required for a single weapon. This stockpile limitation will last for 15 years. Because of this deal, Iran will modify the core of its reactor in Iraq so that it will not produce weapons-grade plutonium. And it has agreed to ship the spent fuel from the reactor out of the country for the lifetime of the reactor. For at least the next 15 years, Iran will not build any new heavy water reactors. Because of this deal, we will, for the first time, be in a position to verify all of these commitments. That means this deal is not built on trust. It is built on verification. Inspectors will have 24/7 access to Iran's key nuclear facilities. Iran will have access to Iran's entire nuclear supply chain, its uranium mines and mills, its conversion facility, and its centrifuge manufacturing and storage facilities. This ensures that Iran will not be able to divert materials from known facilities to covert ones. Some of these transparency measures will be in place for 25 years.
Later on in his address, President Obama made assurances that he has Israel's back and warned Congress not to attempt to block the deal.
I welcome a robust debate in Congress on this issue, and I welcome scrutiny of the details of this agreement. But I will remind Congress that you don't make deals like this with your friends. We negotiated arms control agreements with the Soviet Union when that nation was committed to our destruction, and those agreements ultimately made us safer. I am confident that this deal will meet the national security interests of the United States and our allies. So I will veto any legislation that prevents the successful implementation of this deal. We do not have to accept an inevitable spiral into conflict, and we certainly shouldn't seek it. And precisely because the stakes are so high, this is not the time for politics or posturing. Tough talk from Washington does not solve problems. Hard-nosed diplomacy, leadership that has united the world's major powers, offers a more effective way to verify that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapon. Now, that doesn't mean that this deal will resolve all of our differences with Iran. We share the concerns expressed by many of our friends in the Middle East, including Israel and the Gulf states, about Iran's support for terrorism and its use of proxies to destabilize the region. But that is precisely why we are taking this step. Because an Iran armed with a nuclear weapon would be far more destabilizing and far more dangerous to our friends and to the world. Meanwhile, we will maintain our own sanctions related to Iran's support for terrorism, its ballistic missile program, and its human rights violations. We will continue our unprecedented efforts to strengthen Israel's security, efforts that go beyond what any American administration has done before. And we will continue the work we began at Camp David to elevate our partnership with the Gulf states to strengthen their capabilities to counter threats from Iran or terrorist groups like ISIL. However, I believe that we must continue to test whether or not this region, which has known so much suffering, so much bloodshed, can move in a different direction.
Shortly after the deal was announced, Prime Minister Netanyahu, who's long been opposed to the emerging nuclear agreement, said it was a historic mistake.
Our concern, of course, is that the militant Islamic State of Iran is going to receive a sure path to nuclear weapons. Many of the restrictions that were supposed to prevent it from getting there will be lifted. And in addition, Iran will get a jackpot, a cash bonanza of hundreds of billions of dollars, which will enable it to continue to pursue its aggression and terror in the region and in the world. This is a bad mistake of historic proportions. I think we will continue to have the job of defending our way of life, our freedoms, and our security.
Reaction to the deal inside the Knesset was swift and unanimous in its condemnation, although members of the opposition pointed a finger at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as the reason for the bad deal. Education Minister Naftali Bennett said on Twitter that the agreement has spawned a terror nuclear superpower and that Israel will not hesitate to defend itself. Former Foreign Minister and Chairman of Israel Beitenu Avigdor Lieberman compared the nuclear deal to the deal with North Korea in the 1990s that allowed it to obtain nuclear weapons a decade later. He added that it was also reminiscent of the Munich Agreement that allowed Nazi Germany's annexation of parts of Czechoslovakia, which led directly to World War II. A black flag waves above this deal, and it will be remembered in history as a black day for the entire free world, he said. Deputy Foreign Minister Tzipi Kotoveli called the deal a historic capitulation agreement of the West to the axis of evil led by Iran, which will continue to spread terror and it will metastasize everywhere. The head of the opposition, Isaac Herzog, said it is inconceivable that we should reach this crucial moment with zero influence over the emerging agreement. That is the result of a personal and exclusive failure by Netanyahu, who chose his political victory over our relationship with the United States and Israel's security interest. And Yair Lapid, leader of Yesh Atid, called on the Prime Minister to resign. Because of the way that he has managed the situation, the door of the White House is closed to him. Half of Congress isn't willing to listen to him. We weren't represented in Vienna. Our intelligence relations were damaged, and we're all paying the price for his complete failure in preventing the deal. IBA's Eli Walgalanter was in the Knesset this morning and asked the coalition and opposition MK whether all party heads should gather for a photo op to show the world that Israel is united against the deal.
I think that's an interesting question. I think that maybe that's the thing that should be happening. But I think most of all, what should happen here is that Benjamin Netanyahu, as Prime Minister, should address the Israeli people. He has continuously, what he did is actually talk about Iran, talk about Iran, talk about Iran. Where were we when all this was happening just before us? We weren't even a pawn on this chessboard. So I think that's the most important thing. The Netanyahu stands before the Israeli people, addresses them, and tells them what's going to happen now, starting now.
I think that we should do that. I think that it's a bad deal, and instead of using this low-level politics, we need to collaborate together to put the ego aside, and all the leaders from the opposition and from the coalition need to be aside, a prime minister that conduct this fight, and he is responsible to the sanction on Iran. He presented this issue before the UN, before Congress, and I think that this is the right time to show loyalty to the state of Israel. It's not for Benjamin Netanyahu, and to the citizens of the state of Israel, to our children that are going to fight to have better life for us in this place.
Two Republican presidential candidates spoke out against the world power's nuclear deal with Iran. Speaking at the 10th annual Christians United for Israel summit in Washington, the gathering also heard a video conference message from Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Now they're on the brink of getting us to a table we should have never sat down and ever began a negotiation with. And John Kerry should get up on his crutches. He ought to walk out of that room, go straight to Jerusalem, hug Benjamin Netanyahu, and say, we're going to stand with our real friend, and it isn't the Iranians.
If you want a peaceful nuclear power program, you can have it. If you want an enrichment capability to make a bomb, the answer is no. If you want a war, you will lose it. They're crazy, but they're not stupid.
The forces of militant Islam are rushing to fill the void, and they are targeting some of the oldest Christian communities on earth with expulsion, forced conversion, rape, and murder. Think about that. Now imagine what these forces would do with nuclear weapons. Preventing the Islamic Republic of Iran from building nuclear weapons is the paramount challenge of our generation. This is not about partisan politics. This is about survival. This is about our future. Friends, Israel and the United States are stronger when we stand together. Our alliance is based upon the common values our two countries share.
Here in Jerusalem, there was little support from the Israeli public for the nuclear agreement.
I think that there was no choice but for the American government and the others to try to reach an agreement with Iran. I'm not convinced that the agreement, as I understand it, will actually stop Iran from getting a bomb, but you have to try.
And now they're going to get all this money and they're going to fund even more terrorism. And it's just made everything so bad, and it's going to cause the death of so many more people. And it's just horrible. I think it's just horrible.
I'm very surprised that President Obama, regardless of what the guarantees are, Iran, just like North Korea, cannot be trusted. And I hope that the U.S. Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate will go over this agreement very carefully, and if necessary, hold it back.
Turning to the Greek financial crisis, in Athens, Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras faces a showdown with the rebels in his own party who are furious at what they consider capitulations to European demands for one of the most sweeping austerity packages ever demanded of a Eurozone government. Just hours after a deal that saw Greece surrender much of its sovereignty to outside supervision in return for agreeing to an 86 billion euro bailout, doubts are emerging as to whether Tsipras will be able to hold his government together. The terms imposed by international lenders at the emergency summit in Brussels obliged Tsipras to abandon promises of ending austerity. Instead, he must try to pass legislation to cut pensions, increase value-added tax, and limit spending, and he must do so by tomorrow. Tsipras says that he fought a tough battle and averted the plan for financial strangulation, and he is picking up some support from opposition lawmakers.
It's a relief after all these days of agony we had. We have a deal. The Greek people want to stay in the Eurozone and the European Union, and with this deal we secured that. So we're happy. Of course, there is a lot of work to be done, a lot of implementation of these measures, but I think the Greek people has taken a clear decision. We want to stay in the Eurozone.
Here at home, a crucial day for the mega supermarket chain, which is teetering on the verge of bankruptcy. Judges at the Low District Court are expected to rule on a proposed debt arrangement that will help pull the struggling chain out of its mega crisis. This after the four major banks, which Mega owes nearly half of its 1.3 billion shekel debt, failed to reach agreement over the draft agreement. Bank Hapoalim, the largest debtor, rejected the current arrangement, requesting a separate deal and insisting that the owners first dig deeper into their pockets to return their enormous debt. Avigdor Kaplan, CEO of Alon Blue Square, which controls Mega, committed to funding 240 million shekels to support the ailing chain. Kaplan said he was dismayed over Bank Hapoalim's failure to support the debt arrangement. The court must now decide whether to approve the deal, despite Bank Hapoalim's objection, or to begin the dismantling of Mega and lead to the layoff of its 6,000 employees. President Reuven Rivlin is in mourning due to the death of his 84-year-old sister Esther, who will be laid to rest on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. Before receiving the news yesterday, the president paid a special visit to the Jewish Afghan section in the Mount of Olives cemetery, which has suffered extensive vandalism in recent months. More than 60 graves have been desecrated. During his visit, the president was told the visitors to the cemetery are often pelted with stones. Police security has been heightened around the cemetery in recent weeks. Officials responsible for the upkeep of the graves said this was an almost impossible task because security cameras have been broken or stolen on numerous occasions. The president said that the state must do all it can to prevent such attacks. Prior to his tour of the Afghan section, the president visited the graves of his parents, who are buried in another section of the cemetery. There was a moving ceremony at the Western Wall yesterday when a group of Holocaust survivors belatedly celebrated their bar mitzvahs. The survivors were denied their coming-of-age ceremonies in Europe due to the Nazi persecution, but as the saying goes, better late than never. Ashkenazi Chief Rabbi David Lau led the ceremony, which was organized by the Yad Ezer Lechaver organization that runs a support center for Holocaust survivors in Israel. The eldest of the survivors attending was 94 years old, and many of the bar mitzvah boys arrived at the ceremonies with their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. A man-made spacecraft is about to reach the farthest place in our solar system. NASA's New Horizons spacecraft is closing in on Pluto for an unprecedented flyby that is expected to reveal a great deal about the previously unexplored planet. The spaceship has covered 3 billion miles in 9 years, and scientists say they are excited about the images the world is going to receive.
And now when you look at an image of Pluto, you see a real planet there. You see a complex world that just begs for exploration. And yet, we're going to do 100 times better than that with the images made on Tuesday. In fact, the images made will have 10,000 times as many pixels in each pixel as we see now. We only have one spacecraft. We have to get this right. And now we're on Pluto's doorstep. And it's just thrilling to all of us. And I can't imagine what it'll be like the day after tomorrow when we actually get there and accomplish this.
In local money matters, the shekel was mixed in foreign currency trading while shares were down on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. Here are the late afternoon numbers. Turning to the weather forecast, no changes predicted in temperatures. Here are the highs and lows for the next 24 hours at home and abroad. And that's all for this newscast. Aaron Viner will be here tomorrow with more news from Israel and abroad. Until then, I'm Laura Cornfield, wishing you a great evening and shalom from Jerusalem.